In this last section, you're going to go ahead and first of all review the primary source document Act 16 because parts of it are going to show up in the lecture itself here. Okay, so spend a moment, go ahead and make sure you have reviewed the answers to Acts chapter 16 and go ahead and pause the video. All right, in coming back, our again key theme here is how Roman and Han dynasties controlled vast empires for a really long period of time. So we're going to go and take a look at this last section here in terms of the unification of the Roman Empire. Okay. So with that, we want to be able to take a look at ways by which this occurred. So despite the transition from a republic to an imperial government, the Senate still continues to exist, whereby the leading patricians, the elites, will will still try to create policies. The plebeians will try to counter. The leading consuls will try to veto. All of this has a reduced role in the empire, but it's still there. And not only that, but it's a place for elites to go. It's still a prestigious position where if you're a social elite, you would still want to do this. And so it allows for some interaction with the emperor. And not only that, but it's a coveted position by most. Okay, and so there is in existence a Senate that still continued to rule. Another key part of the Roman Empire is the bureaucracy. And so if you're looking at the Acts document, there's a jailer who obviously is fearing for his life and felt like he needed to take his own life because of failing the job and failing the position. But he's an example of a local bureaucrat. And the Romans, while not as extensive as the Han scholar gentry, did have oftentimes local governments with local officials running them, many of which would be loyal to the central state in Rome. So the Senate still exists. There is a bureaucracy that will help to ensure that the imperial mandates are actually followed. Okay. Secondly, Rome is a diverse empire, vast lands, different groups, different languages, and so forth. But Rome actually has a special process of including these individuals in the process. And much of it has to do with, not always, but one of the key ways to become part of the general Roman society is to join the auxilia. Basically auxiliary troops that join the main Roman legions. Many of these are locals with specialized skills, ranging from like archers to slingers to cavalrymen, people who rode on horses to fight, archers, and other units that would support the Roman heavy infantry. And in doing so, after their service, they might be granted citizenship. Okay, the ability to give them special rights. And if you look at the document, Acts, the question F in the book of Acts, okay, it's going to talk about how all of a sudden, okay, as these local officials are manhandling Paul and Silas, they find that Paul is a Roman citizen. And as a result of that, they stop and they realize that he has special rights. He has the rights to be able to access the Roman court and the Roman legal system. And so once they understood that, they said, oh, no, no, we have to be really careful with this guy. So there is special rights to come out of citizenship, where if you gain citizenship, you and your offspring from here on out will become Roman citizens. And over time and over generations, there's more and more of these people who are not Roman, or not from the Italian peninsula, not from Rome, but all over the empire, okay, where they're coming together and becoming more Roman, okay, as time progresses as well. Okay. Not only that, but there's a law that will defend them as well. Okay. Going all the way back to the Roman Republic, very early on in the 5th century BC, the lower class plebeians created a set of laws known as the 12 Tables to counter the power of the patricians. Okay. And they wrote it down in 12 different tablets. Okay. This is 5th century. Okay. You fast forward almost 1,000 years, okay, of Roman rule, of Roman legal traditions being passed on over generations. Okay. All of this is going to be compiled by the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. So about 1,000 years of law compiled. Okay. And so you can imagine, look, they're trying to figure out what works best, what is common sense fairness, and so forth. And they would even have laws. An example of this, of a law that was cited in the empire, was what happens if a slave was being shaved by a barber in a public square, right? So he's getting a shave, and then there are two men who are playing ball nearby, and one accidentally hits the barber with the ball, causing him to cut the slave's throat, right? Who's responsible? The barber, the catcher, the pitcher? So there's laws to figure out those type of situations. By the way, if you want to know, according to Roman law, the slave, for anyone so foolish as to be shaved in a public place, was asking for trouble, and therefore the slave bore responsibility for his own death. Okay, it's not always completely fair, but again, there's a system that's generated and is written down that you can apply to that protects, hey, Romans all over, whether you're citizen or not, a slave or free, and so forth. And there were a lot of slaves. Okay. Many of these, the Roman Empire, and particularly in the big cities like Rome, had a lot of poor urban citizens. And so the way that many of them would actually be appeased was through a number of methods. One is by bread. A free bread given away in Rome. Much of it is coming from Egypt, sort of the bread basket of the Roman Empire. And the other is to provide games, okay, to keep people entertained and happy. And that would include, okay, when they say circus, they mean like a circle, like something that is connected in a circle. And in this case, it's horse racing or chariot racing, okay? And others, and we've talked about, and you've probably seen in movies or clips, okay, the gladiators and the gladiator battles and so forth. Okay. Another way that Rome is unified, is through what we call patron clientelism. And what patron clientelism is that there is a patron, somebody of power, but they need support. They can't hold this power by themselves. And so they need clients, people who would be loyal to them and would support them even if others do not. And so there's one particular group known as the equites, or the equestrian class. If you know the term equestrian, equestrian means horse, right? And so this is in a lot of ways the economic middle class, those who were actually wealthy enough to own a horse and to sustain it, to feed the horse, even though it's living in the cities. And so you need some wealth for that to occur. And many of these equites historically went into battle on horseback. Okay. But this particular group oftentimes were businessmen who enriched themselves by securing contracts to supply the army or to help collect taxes, and so forth. And so they became a very prosperous group, oftentimes a land-owning class, and a third political group alongside others that became one of the growing powers in Rome. And the emperors realized that this is a key sort of political order that he needed to align with. And so many of the equites, in order to gain government contracts, became friends with the emperor. And so when there are problems in the provinces, when the Roman aristocrats are challenging the emperor's emperors can turn to the equites for support, right? And so this is a means to empower those who may not be, may have the birthright of aristocrats in this case here. So the new equestrian class will help the emperors to rule and to govern, that they have particular allies. Okay. Furthermore, the Romans were religiously pluralist. So in other words, they allowed for all sorts of religions. And so there's this building, a temple in Rome called the Pantheon, where Roman gods were situated. And everywhere that the Romans conquered, they would actually bring other local gods into this pantheon to join sort of this great collection of gods as well. And they allowed people to worship freely. There were some limitations to this. First of which is the imperial cult. And so they had asked, in order to create legitimacy to the emperor, you would worship him as a god, which groups such as the Jews and eventually later on the Christians would reject. And in a lot of ways, the Roman state will turn on them as a result of that. But generally, there was great cultural acceptance and religious acceptance in the empire. Throughout many of the provinces as well. And so they were able to get a lot of loyal citizens as a result of that. And if you looked at the Acts document, right, part of why the Christians were, Paul and Silas were being persecuted was because they probably did not approve of the imperial cult, and they were also calling for a religion that wasn't necessarily the most tolerant, right? But the belief in a single God, the one and only God, in this case here. In addition to this, so religious tolerance as a key component of the Roman Empire, there was also greater regional autonomy as well. Rome is a big empire, and so different regions may call for different policies, and they allowed for governors to make key decisions on what to do with the Jews who are now rebelling in their region, allowing for the governors to kind of make those particular decisions as well. But over time, especially with the Roman army going from place to place with the internal trade that's going on in the Mediterranean world, there was a lot of intermarriage, which you should see from the Acts document in question A as well, that Timothy and Paul were of mixed marriages or products of a mixed marriage. And you see this going on where Roman soldiers from Africa would find themselves in Britain, marrying a local Briton there and producing offspring that were not necessarily Briton, not necessarily African, and many of them over time will start to see themselves as Roman in this case here. So yes, there's regional autonomy, but more and more so people are becoming Roman. We see this in the language as well, where Greek and Latin becomes the lingua franca of the time and of the age as well. There is the Roman professional military. They fought well. They were probably, if anything else, the most organized of all of the ancient armies. And that organization will help them to win battle after battle after battle in this case. Professional military that will not only conquer, but then also to help to build roads, to connect places together, and to further Romanize different people groups together, as different people come into play as well. In fact, one of the early Roman emperors was, and really early on, was not Roman. He was actually from Asia. There's the adaptation of Greek diplomacy. The Romans just didn't simply conquer. They use logic, reasoning, and diplomacy to oftentimes win tributaries and other states over as well. So it's not just simply fighting, there is logic involved in foreign policy. And lastly, the connections that are built by not only the public road system, and also travel by the sea. You can imagine the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, as this great highway that connected Rome with every part of the empire. You can connect with groups. There's interregional trade that is occurring and safely because of what Rome is able to do along the seashores and through maritime expansion. But like we see, all good things will eventually come to an end, and collapse of both the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty comes from a number of reasons. One, failed leadership. Many emperors themselves weren't great emperors, right? They've grown up in a palace and they really failed to rule, or oftentimes they use the resources of the state for their own personal benefit or entertainment or on their own vices. Right? In this case here, sea battles in the Colosseum, which were extremely costly, albeit I'm sure quite entertaining as well. There's also imperial intrigue in Rome. Emperors weren't chosen just simply because they were born first. Okay, it could be a number of individuals, and as a result, there's oftentimes assassinations within the family, outside the family, by the Praetorian Guard, the supposed protectors of the emperor from ambitious generals, and so there's often a rotating chair of emperors, sometimes several in one year. Okay. There's also catastrophic military failures as well, particularly later on when we get to the nomadic tribes invading, but also others. Rome fought against Persia and lost on a number of different occasions. Okay. Furthermore, if you are not expanding, you're not gaining the wealth that comes from conquering other lands. And if you're just simply protecting lands, there's the cost of trying to maintain the soldiers and the fortifications necessary. So defensive wars tend to be expensive without any return in that defense. And as a result of that, the treasury itself was drained. Okay? And you would go through an early version of inflation where both the Han and also the Romans would start to devalue their currency. Basically, if a copper coin is usually included a certain amount of copper, they would start to take some of that out as well. Okay? And people realized like their money was worth less than before here. So the treasury itself would be drained. Okay? And what it allowed for many regional governors to do is to, as the state becomes weaker, they start to take action. They're going to say, if they're thousands of miles from the capital, say, why do we need the capital at all? Okay? Why don't we do our own thing? Why don't we create my own little kingdom here? So there are challenges by regional authorities. Okay? And finally, the power of nomadic invasions, the Huns into China and also the Huns pushing other tribes and other nomads into the Roman Empire, that creates an immigration crisis. And eventually when the Huns invade themselves and other nomadic groups, other Turkic nomadic groups invade, they will take over and create their own empires and force a partial collapse of the Roman Empire, particularly in the West as well. Okay. So with that, you want to take some time. In part 3, you want to be able to take a look at the lecture discussion, and then from there, use this to address the prompt. Make sure that you check and identify one piece of evidence that you found in the lecture and determine whether it demonstrates imperial consolidation or expansion. So you should only have one of these boxes filled out for each row here. Okay, so you can go ahead and skip the ones that you do not do. Okay, so take some time to go ahead and do this, and all of this will apply to the essay that we will write later.